So we are live. I'm gonna jump right into our topic today. We do have a stop at 5:30. So welcome everyone to Family Law Now After Hours. Today we are talking about effective communication with your co-parent. We will cover practical strategies for reducing conflict and improving day-to-day communication with your co-parent. Learn techniques for setting boundaries, managing emotions, and keeping the focus on your child's well-being. We are running a shorter session today and we will end at 5:30. We do have seasoned lawyers with us today, both Gia and Golan, to share their expertise on this topic. Please use the Q&A feature to submit your general comments and questions about the topic. For specific questions about the details of your family law matter, please contact our team directly. The purpose of this series is to discuss general information on separation, divorce, and family law matters. Any information provided here should not be construed as legal advice. Stay tuned until the end. We will be sharing how you can schedule a free 20-minute consultation with one of our lawyers. Moving on to our bios for today, we have Gia joining us. Gia is an associate family lawyer with us with over a decade of solid litigation experience. She prides herself on being able to navigate challenging situations to create dynamic and sustainable solutions for all of our clients. She is passionate about helping families create child-focused parenting plans. Gia has spent over 10 years as legal counsel with a child welfare agency where she practiced child protection law dealing with complex and highly emotional cases. She has also worked on cases that have gone to the Ontario Court of Appeal, the Divisional Court, and the Supreme Court of Canada. We also have Golan joining us back again today. Golan is an associate lawyer at a firm and a certified mediator with over 25 years of legal experience. He was first called to the bar in Israel in 1996 and then called to the bar in Ontario in 2003. Golan has extensive experience in representing clients and negotiation agreements as well as trial work. He also has experience in negotiating with authorities to advance a client's interest and has represented clients at various levels of court, including on appeals. Lastly, there is me. I am a dedicated family lawyer with a strong focus on compassionate and effective legal representation. I have a background in business management, which enhances my strategic approach to legal matters. I excel in negotiation, achieving settlements through strategic dialogue, and strong advocacy for my clients. I prioritize clear communication, ensuring that clients are informed and empowered throughout the legal process. I will give it away to our panelists. Golan, can you get us started today for our topic? And to set the tone for today's discussions, can you speak to why it's important in co-parents to keep the focus on the children's needs and how that shift in mindset can affect communication between parents?
Okay, thank you, Shamsa, for the nice introduction and um, and for the question, the topic. It's a sensitive topic, you can tell just by virtue of dealing with uh, you know the the most caring things that we can have in the family context, and that's the children. The idea that litigation sometimes commences or that there is a adversarial or conflict situation between parents uh, necessarily requires to shift the focus for a moment and throughout the litigation from the personal agenda of one parent or the other regarding their goals and how they would like to see things unfold to their benefit, but rather a shift the view to that of the children and try to be as much as possible a mindful of what's best for them. Sometimes it's coincide. Many times it means that you have to take the higher road and think about how you advance the children by not necessarily limiting their exposure or their contact with the other parent or the extended family. At times, I still see that, which looks like many times it looks like just trying to punish the other parent or trying to reprise and just kind of get back at him or her through the children. So the use of the children as pawns in this unfortunate war or conflict is really damaging to children, especially of young age, that are kind of torn between the parents. Is obviously most times they truly love both. They want to see both parents in their lives, and they like to see their involvement. But um, they're if you pull. It's like a tug of war, trying to pull the child from one end to another, or try to get him to be siding with one parent. That is really, really damaging emotionally, and it can have a long-term impact on the child. So what we're trying to really, in this kind of short time that we have, um, let people understand that it's not necessarily a legal issue here. It could be psychological, behavioral, it could be social. This is something that has to do with keeping the peace in a sense, in isolation of the children who are not, who should not be part of this conflict between parents who are separating. So, if the children were going to school, having their activities, um, you know, being happy with their play dates, going to see their physician and their friends, etc. You want to keep that routine going. You want to keep that involvement of the parents in place without causing interruption just because the parents are not getting along. The way around that, I mean, we cannot, make parents get along just for that sake. Sometimes the tension is just too much. But this is where you have to reach to some resources, whether it's family friends, mutual friends, whether it's outside help like mediators, um, even if it goes as far as retaining respective lawyers to each of the parent, then the lawyers are more detached from the conflict, from the emotional conflict, and can knock some sense into both parents to do the right thing for the children. It doesn't mean that the lawyers always agree, but at least it would be more on the a, on the scale, or at least focusing on what they each think is in the best interest of the child. So at least the focus is going to shift to the best interest, but it doesn't mean that the lawyers, just like the parents, may not agree what are the best interests of the child. But at least you're moving the focus to that kind of a area, and then that the agenda, the personal agenda of the parents are kind of being pushed aside, and we try to kind of, by doing that, reducing the flare in this bad relationship or breakup. That what I would say is, when we call it co-parenting, we really want to see the both parents involved. If that was the case before the separation, right? It's not as if we're changing the roles all of a sudden just because there is a separation, and all of a sudden somebody was not involved in the children's upbringing or activities, or doing things at home with them, etc. All of a sudden want to take a bigger role for ulterior motives, like let's call it that way. So that's something that is, as much as I would say, maybe it's a trigger to do the right thing in terms of parenting, but it's not necessarily the immediate thing that need to happen in terms of the disruption to the regular routine of children and causing them that instability. So that's the idea of co-parenting, is that there would be a level of cooperation that focuses on the child's need and um, well-being such that they're not really emotionally, at least emotionally affected by the separation.
Thank you, Colin. And you're 100% correct. The focus should always be the best interest of the children. And when it comes to communication, the focus should be, working on the relationship with the co-parent so that you can keep the children away from the conflict and they are not, involved in the communications that the parents might have to undertake and the conflict that they may be facing. And I like how you've touched on the importance of keeping the focus on the children and their needs and the need to reduce conflict and kind of like moving on from this Gia. Now that Colin has kind of hit on that, can you also talk about methods of communication? So whether it's texting, emailing, or using a parenting app, how can that, further what Colin has said and improve the tune and effectiveness of communication between co-parents? And how can choosing the right communication medium could help co-parents maintain these boundaries and avoid unnecessary conflict?
Yeah. So just to build on what Golan was saying in terms of like focusing on your children's needs and being able to like co-parent with that other parent, it's really important to, communicate and try to communicate in a way that doesn't trigger conflict or expose your children or your child to conflict, because it does affect their emotional well-being. And so when you are prioritizing the children, what you're also looking at is how do I communicate with the other individual in a way that minimizes conflict or my child's exposure to conflict. And some of the ways in which we can do that is be mindful of how you communicate with the other parent. And so sometimes we tend to be reactionary, and so we want to try to steer away from that. You'd want to be mindful of the language that you use, try not to be um, laying blame or accusing the other. Try to rephrase your what you may want to say and make sure that it's sort of neutral language and it doesn't have that other person put their back up against the wall. So we're trying to be as neutral as possible and rephrasing our questions that we may have or comments that we want to make to the other individual. Now, sometimes having a regular conversation may not work with the other individual just by picking up a phone or just speaking with them face to face. And sometimes you may need other means to sort of communicate in a way to minimize conflict. And those could be through family applications like Up Close or our Family Wizard, or it could just be written sort of like email or text messages or WhatsApp. Those are means in which you can utilize that to try to minimize conflict in how you like communicate with the other individual, but also keeping track of what that conversation is like in the event that there is some type of misinterpretation or there's like an issue that needs to be clarified. It's very important for you to always have, it could be very handy to have, confirmation of what was said and how the response was or what the response was. And so again, being mindful of, maybe sometimes if you have to talk to the other parent about an issue or that person sends you a message, instead of like reacting right away or or like responding right away, perhaps you may want to take some time to think about how you're going to communicate with that individual and how to respond in a calm manner that doesn't trigger conflict or further conflict. Because at the end of the day, one, you may have lots of years still where you have to co-parent with that individual and you're thinking about yourself as well when you're thinking, I have to continue communicating with that individual over how many years. And so you want to try to maintain peace as much as possible for your own well-being, but also you're thinking about what the impact could be for your child if that tumultuous relationship continues because you guys can't communicate. So those are important things to be mindful of with when you're communicating with the co-parent.
Thank you for those
Mhm.
tips, Gia. Very, very helpful. Golan, I thought you were going to say something. Did I cut you
Yeah,
off?
just a comment to Gia's suggestions to the viewers. and the listeners. On the one hand, it's a handy tool to have things written down and the record is there. Often we find it making its way to court because when the language is not appropriate and the conflict is showing in the tone of the texting, the emails, the use of the applications like the family app that Gia just mentioned, it could be to your detriment. So, having it written down in a text or an email, at the same time that it's kind of taking away the adversarial or the confrontation with the other parent, you have to be mindful on how on the tone and how things are being said, and focused on really the issue at hand, whether it's solving a problem or whether it's giving an input on an issue, such that it's not inflammatory and not a just just being really, really attentive to the language that is being used, because it may come back to haunt you later.
Yeah. And if I may add to that, I've had clients say that sometimes I feel like I can't respond the way that I want to respond. And in a way, I'm not being a strong person or showing that I'm not, that this individual can't have the upper hand or bully me. But going back to Golan's point about being mindful of your communication, if there's going to be a record of it, and how you want to be seen by somebody who is going to be looking at it and making a decision. For example, if this you end up in court and the judge is going to be looking at this communication, you you may think that you want to defend yourself to the other individual, but a judge may not look at that favorably. And so, yes, oftentimes you have to take the upper hand and be that bigger person, but it is really to your benefit. And you always, again, keeping in mind, I'm trying to reduce conflict, and I'm keeping my child's focus as a priority, to minimize conflict overall.
Thank you, both of you. I can safely take away from your comments that we all need to be thoughtful about how we communicate, and you want to keep those communications health focused and calm and neutral. But even like talking, I guess building a bit more on communication misunderstandings. Golan, can you speak a bit more on how these misunderstandings could be reduced, perhaps, by having a written down parenting plan, or versus where parties don't have an agreed upon parenting plan and they are kind of going on the fly about what the parenting's going to look like, and how there can be differences based on having a set down consistent parenting plan versus an up in the air, vague parenting plan that the parties might be following.
Right. Thank you for that. So the best way to making sure that things are clear and accurate and people are able to follow them, without misinterpreting what was meant and the intention, etc., is to have clear communication. And clear communication comes with a written agreements. And we always, throughout the process, whether it's with the court proceedings or prior to court proceeding, that's even more encouraged and advisable, that we can achieve, like you mentioned, a parenting plan, for example. What is a parenting plan? It's really an agreement on issues concerning a child, whether it's the school is going to, the medical attention, the needs that need to be looked at, the schedule for parenting, when do we pick him up, when do we drop him off, the locations, the exchanges, all of the things can be very, very detailed depending on the type of a personalities and conflict, the level of conflict that we have here. Sometimes we go to a real details as to exact times, location, somebody that will be present there, etc., etc. So agreement definitely are the way to go. And agreement means it's a written a contract of obligations between the parties that are signed by the parties and their lawyers to make it more effective and enforceable, such that the parties will get their opportunities for legal advice, um, unless they decide to waive that or intentionally realize that they do not want to have representation. But in generally speaking, it would be a safer bet to go with an agreement that would include the parenting plan. It could include other topics as well, as that's involved in a separation. But right now we're speaking about the issue of dealing with the children. So the relevant aspect of an agreement would be the parenting and everything that goes along with that. So yeah, having it written down and having both parties' concerns already addressed as a possible scenario that we need to kind of make sure that it's clear enough that the parties will know when and how and what to do. That certainly can avoid conflict later on. You can imagine that when you do things, orally, when things are, even if when there's no conflict and things are fine, and you just gotta have an agreement on an issue, and then some of the details are forgotten or were miscommunicated or misunderstood. And this is kind of open the door for conflict because you don't have the record, you don't have the anything to rely on, and it becomes, kind of a conflict of um, he said, she said, and then that becomes an issue by itself. So we always encourage that if there is an agreement, beautiful, let's reduce it to writing. Let's put it on a piece of paper, and it's something that would be there to refer to when the time is needed. So certainly something to consider in the process of kind of reducing the conflict as well, because that's a way to kind of look back and see what is it that we agreed. And if we need to change it, it doesn't mean that we cannot bring it back to the table and say, hey, I think the circumstances have changed. Maybe we should do something different. You kind of you renegotiate, and unless maybe the parties agree, and then it can be amended to reflect the changes or any other circumstances that require the change. So that's the quick version of why documentation and agreement can be very helpful. They also can be enforced later on if there is um, court proceedings, and an agreement like that can be endorsed as a court order later on or turn into a court order, then it would be enforced by the authorities if necessary. Um, that means that there is a high conflict right there, but it is a possibility, and that can only be done when you have something in writing, and then it can be turned into a court order. Um, yeah, so that's kind of in general overview of keeping things in writing and having it witnessed by your lawyers and getting the advice by your respective lawyers. That's my recommendations on that.
Thank you, Colin, and you're correct again. Um, I think having a written down agreement, especially if communication is already an issue between the parties, then having a parenting plan that's written down could potentially limit some of those disagreements. And like you said, that it's not set in stone to the point where you can't ever make any changes to it. If circumstances change, then there could be changes to the parenting plan, and you could further enter into an updated parenting plan depending on how those circumstances have changed. I'm kind of going back to communication, and I know, Golan, you spoke on that already. Gia, I was hoping if you wanted to add some more points on not just communication, but how parents can involve children in adult matters when they are struggling with communication, whether it could be through venting in front of them or using them to
Mhm.
pass messages along or speaking negatively about the other parent. And how can parents stay mindful of those moments? And what are some of the red flags that suggest that a child is being drawn into conflict, and what strategies parents can potentially use to avoid these situations?
Yeah. So we want children to be children as much as possible. And so, if mommy and daddy are having issues or they're not getting along, we don't want our children or your child to be a part of that. We don't want them to be taking sides. We want as much as possible for a child to, where it's safe and is able to happen, have a good relationship with both parents, regardless of whether or not they're in the they're living under the same roof and or a unit. And that the ability to have a good nurturing relationship with both parents is going to go a long way for your child if that if that could happen in a positive and a healthy way. But that gets interfered with if like sometimes the children are exposed to, what we call adult issues. So mommy and daddy not getting along, they're fighting for whatever reason. Um, those are that should stay between you and the other parent and keep your child away from that. It does really affect their emotional well-being, how they interact with the other parent. It affects their relationship, and it could have long-term impact for their ability to have relationships later on. And it and so and apart from that, it could also affect how they are in how they socialize, how they operate in school and things like that. So be very mindful about the impact that could happen to children if they are exposed to conflict. So you want to very much be mindful of not involving them in adult issues. And you may not really understand, that perhaps having conversation with grandma when the child's in the room could and overhearing it could be impacting that child. So again, be very careful about making sure that they're not in earshot of like conversation that you may have with another adult. It doesn't mean that you have to physically have that conversation with the child to be involving them in adult issues. It's making sure that they're not hearing it at all. And so I think the only thing I would want to add further is when you are mindful of that, you are prioritizing your child's emotional well-being in such a significant way. And it is not something to minimize in any way because there's such long-term impacts and effects that could affect your child in many different ways as a result of that.
Thank you so much, Gia. Before we go, Golan, if you could quickly say a few lines on involving professionals, because I feel like even with the best intentions, communication can sometimes break down no matter how hard co-parents are trying and they may hit a wall. And so what support can professionals bring in keeping things child focused if the co-parents themselves are really struggling with communication?
So one of the things that we normally do in our practice that we refer to as a collaborative practice when we bring in a professional to deal with the parenting issues. So you have parenting professionals that sometimes they are a people with experience, could be social worker, therapist, um, and then their experience regarding how to deal with children and getting a parenting plan that would be appropriate for their children and to the parents by speaking to the parents, sometimes depending on the ages of the children, getting the input from the children, that can help getting to the right parenting plan. Similarly, you can use a mediator, just a third party professional, could be a lawyer, could be a professional mediator with other a set of skills or credentials that dealing with that kind of parenting issues that can bring to the table some creative ideas and planning that the parents may not have thought of and maybe can appeal to the parties to come to an agreement on these issues. So definitely the use of professionals in this area is sometimes crucial. It it gives you an objective view on the situation as opposed to this personal agenda of one parent or the other. And the focus of that individual is really just looking at the children, and because of that non-emotional attachment to either party here. So having that person, whether it's a parenting professional, a mediator, that could be very helpful to the parties to resolve issues surrounding the children. I understand that you have to wrap it up, Shanza, so back to
Thank you,
you.
Golan. Thank you so much, both of you, Golan and Gia, for your time and sharing your knowledge with us today. And thank you to our audience for tuning into Family Law Now. Following the session, there will be a brief survey, which will allow you to share your comments and your suggestions for future topics that you would like us to explore. We appreciate all your feedback. You can also take advantage of a complimentary consultation with one of our lawyers. You can contact our intake team at intake@russellalexander.com. You can mention our after hours series to schedule your appointment. Registration is also open for our next event, which is Understanding the Divorce Process in Ontario. You can go to russellalexander.com/family law now to sign up. Thank you again, both of you, Golan and Gia, and thank you to our audience for tuning into our Family Law Now After Hours session. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you, Shanza. Thank you.